Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, USINFI Government Relations Review and Division Update. My name is Janelle Berkeley, Member Programs Manager at ATA, and I will be providing an update on the recent merge of the USIFI and NFI divisions. We will then hear from our Government Relations consultants, Sarah Beatty and Augie Tantillo, for an update on our advocacy program and policy issues. We'll then have a Q&A at the end to answer any of your questions. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. During today's webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit questions or comments to Sarah, Augie, or myself by typing them into the questions box of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will address these questions at the end of the session. You can find a PDF version of the PowerPoint slides in the handout tab of your dashboard. Please feel free to download and follow along. Today's webinar will be recorded and sent out in an email following the session via GoToWebinar. Let's get started. All right, so you should have all gotten an email a couple of weeks ago about the division merge. So as of January 23, USIFI and NFI merged to become one division, the U.S. Industrial and Narrow Fabrics Institute, or USINFI. The merging of the two groups was a natural decision to unify all the efforts into one group. Since the past about 20 years, these groups have been having very similar programming. It really just made sense to put them all together to unify efforts. Along with this, the advisory boards have also been merged, and we will make sure that the narrow fabrics, industrial fabrics, and advanced are all represented on the board to reflect the membership. And here you will see a list of our board leaders, and this is the merge of both boards. And then we have some board members on the call today who will also be available to answer any questions at the end of this session. So with the merge, we do have an additional fee, an additional annual fee to being a member of USINFI, and this is broken down below by class. And just a side note at the bottom there, we did have an update to our dues structure with classes 1 through 7 now broken up by suppliers, distributors, or converters, and end product manufacturers or fabricators. So if you want to look at these changes, please reach out directly or visit our membership page on our website. And I would just really like to emphasize that this fee we are able to accomplish so much at a fraction of the cost that it would be to do this alone as your company. So as we work unified, we're able to accomplish a lot. All right, and then our annual advocacy days will take place March 7th through 8th in Washington, D.C. We're back in person after 2 virtual lobby days, so we're very excited to be back on the Hill. And then we have an annual Outlook conference, April 30th through May 2nd in Greenville, South Carolina. And this is a great chance for leaders in U.S. manufacturing to network and get updates for government issues, economics, supply chain, and more. And it's also a really good time to get your emerging leaders involved as well. And finally, our website, usinfi.textiles.org, has additional resources where you can find our backgrounders for our policies on the Hill for the past, I think, 5 years. You'll be able to see that and more. All right, with that, I will now kick it over to Sarah Beatty and Augie Tantillo for advocacy program overview.
Thank you, Janelle, and good afternoon to everyone. Thanks for tuning in. As Janelle mentioned, Augie Tantillo and I work with the now combined USINFI division on government relations advocacy efforts and member educational programming pertaining to what's happening in Washington. We consider it a real privilege to represent you as domestic, industrial, and narrow fabric manufacturers to help educate government policymakers about this industry segment, what you mean to your communities in terms of jobs and other contributions, and the really wide range of innovative products that this sector produces for both commercial and government markets. Next slide, please, Janelle. Our work involves identifying, tracking, and analyzing issues on really an ongoing basis that are before Congress or the executive branch to determine which of those have the potential to impact your businesses. In terms of the administration, both the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and the Commerce Department have direct roles in setting textile trade policy, and they each have textile-specific offices and staffs, and so we're in regular communication with those individuals and nurturing those working relationships and staying up to speed with what they are working on. Also, there are aspects of the work of the U.S. Department of Defense, as well as U.S. Customs and Border Protection, that are relevant as well in terms of what DoD's procuring of textiles and considering CBP's role in enforcing our trade laws. Next slide. So we are watching what's before those agencies as well as what's happening in Congress to identify the issues of interest. We then work with Janelle to make the membership aware of new developments and with your board and division members to formulate positioning for the association on those timely issues. That positioning is then communicated to the relevant decision makers in Washington, and we often also work together and collaborate with broader industry associations to help bolster our efforts and increase effectiveness across the board. To give you a little bit of an example, there's an ad hoc textile and apparel associations group that coordinates on Berry Amendment government procurement matters and strategizing and working together there. And USIFI and NFI, now USI-NFI, have frequently worked together on issues like the China tariffs and other trade matters with other industry associations and co-signing letters and making joint public comment submissions. So we leverage all of our resources to the greatest extent possible. Next slide. Key policy areas that are routinely on our radar screen and on our agenda include trade issues. So anything basically that impacts tariffs on imports of textile products coming into the US and or on US exports to other markets. This work has involved sharing the industrial segment's perspective on FTA negotiations, for example. The most recent one was the USMCA agreement, which updated NAFTA. And then once FTAs are in place, their rules need to be enforced. And so there's ongoing work with implementation. Trade enforcement also extends, of course, beyond FTA countries. We do a lot of work on communicating the importance of holding countries accountable, such as China, who may be disrupting the market and working to undercut the competitiveness of US textile manufacturers through unfair trade practices. So working to identify and address unfair trade practices in our industry segment. In addition to trade, government procurement work is a constant focus as well. This means largely working to preserve and expand Buy American rules that govern US government purchases of textiles by the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and more recently PPE purchases across a number of agencies. In addition to trade and government procurement, regulatory matters have become an increasing focus area, particularly related to PFAS chemicals, and you'll hear a bit more about that from Augie here in a bit. And last, we have also been doing some work on helping to address the labor shortage and aging workforce challenges confronting the industry. Next slide. Our key event, as Janelle mentioned, is the annual Washington Advocacy Days, where members of the division meet directly with their congressional representatives, as well as the textile teams from USTR and the Commerce Department. This has traditionally been an in-person event in Washington. We did have 2 years of virtual advocacy days due to COVID, which has its pros and cons, but still did produce successful events. Most recently, we had our lobby days last March, and all in all, just to give you a sense of the scale, we had 20 companies and staff participants from 14 different companies with production spanning 10 different states, so a really nice geographic footprint there. And we conducted overall 35 different meetings on the issues referenced earlier: trade, government procurement, regulatory, and workforce matters. Next slide. Our event for 2023 is coming up soon, and we are really in the thick of the planning stages right now. This year, as mentioned, we're back in person in DC on March 7th and 8th. We'll start on that Tuesday afternoon with an issue briefing, followed by a meeting with USTR and Commerce, textile officials, and dinner. And then on Wednesday, we'll spend a full day on the Hill with meetings scheduled for the participants with their senators and representatives, as well as meetings with relevant congressional committees like Armed Services and Ways and Means and Finance. We really encourage you to register and attend. If you haven't participated before, please don't be intimidated by this process. These officials need to hear from you directly on what's important to your businesses. We take care of all the briefing materials, the scheduling, and help you to feel prepared and ready to go for advocacy days. And we also have either Augie or myself or someone from the USINFI staff team in the meetings, particularly with any new participants, to help you answer questions, find your way around, all of that good stuff. But that being said, it makes a huge impact to have you as the constituent there in person and demonstrating the importance of these issues to your business. This engagement, I will also say, allows you to build a relationship with these decision makers beyond just these issues. If you ever have a problem and need help from your member of Congress, it's much better to have a baseline working relationship there than trying to start from square one. And so beyond the specific issues, taking the opportunity to utilize this event to build relationships with your members of Congress and generally raise the industry's profile in Washington. And with that, I think I'll pause just for a moment to see if Augie has anything, Augie, that you'd like to add on the general programming before we get into a bit more detail on the issues.
No, Sarah, I think you covered it very well.
Okay, next slide, please, Janelle. In terms of policy, we'll start with the trade front. From a 50,000-foot level, our work, I think, can be best described as focusing on creating an equitable trading environment for U.S. industrial and aero fabric producers. We're working to ensure that government trade policies are supporting your business instead of undermining it. And then I'll just briefly detail the specific issues that are currently on the agenda on the trade front. First is pressing for the renewal of the Miscellaneous Tariff Bill, or MTB as it's known. This is legislation that temporarily eliminates or reduces duties on manufacturing inputs that are not available domestically. Some examples in our area would be things like rayon and acrylic fibers that aren't produced in the US. The last MTB expired in January of 2021, and Congress thus far has failed to get the renewal bill passed. This, of course, is raising costs for domestic manufacturers at a particularly inopportune time when costs are up across the board, and it's high time to get this across the finish line. So we'll be taking the opportunity of advocacy days to press for MTB renewal. Then we have a grouping of what can generally be referenced to as China enforcement issues. The Biden administration is currently conducting an overarching review of the Section 301 penalty tariffs on China. They hit their 4-year mark last summer, and so by statute, USTR has to conduct a review of have they been effective, or should they be continued, are there tweaks that should be made? And our messaging on this issue has been that the tariff actions largely should continue as China's unfair trade practices remain a problem. We haven't addressed the underlying issues. And we have communicated, though, that the product scope should be better calibrated. We should be applying tariffs to finished products as that's where it makes the most sense and creates the most leverage to resolve the underlying issues. When you add penalty tariffs on things, again, similar to the MTB dynamic, on products that aren't made domestically but are used in producing downstream products by US manufacturers, that makes us less competitive in the global marketplace, including against Chinese competitors. So we need exclusions for certain inputs and manufacturing equipment and dyes and chemicals and the like that are primarily or solely available in China and have largely been subject to the tariffs up to this point. Beyond the China tariffs, there's the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act that's aimed at stopping forced labor, including in the production of cotton. That has been a key area here. This region is a huge cotton growing region, and we really should be hearing about shipments being stopped by CBP left and right, but we're generally not. So while there's been important progress on this front, want to take the opportunity to communicate that more robust enforcement activity should be undertaken here and press for that. We've also been working to address tariff waivers on what's known as de minimis shipments. The US has a de minimis level of $800, which is much, much higher than what the rest of the world applies. And so goods that enter the US imported directly by one individual on a single day under $800, think e-commerce here, that comes in duty-free, and the Section 301 tariffs do not apply. Trade has really exploded, as you might imagine, under this provision, and CBP doesn't have a good handle of it. A customs official recently made a sad but comical comment that the US effectively has a free trade agreement with China. It's just called de minimis. So we are working to get more oversight of de minimis and close this loophole. And the last trade issue I'll mention relates to the US Central America Free Trade Agreement, or CAFTA. It's like NAFTA, but for Central America, if you're not familiar. CAFTA is not a new agreement, so you may be wondering why we're talking about CAFTA, but there has been a renewed focus as the Vice President's office launched last year something known as the Call to Action, aimed at trying to address the root causes of migration from Central America. And we've seen some well-funded initiatives by the importing and retailing community to try to leverage that opening in the conversation to say, let's change the rules of origin under CAFTA to allow more flexibility, which in effect would mean allowing Chinese inputs to come into the US through the CAFTA framework duty-free. While you may think of CAFTA as more of an apparel supply chain, would certainly flag this for industrial producers, as this is a huge issue for the industry overall, to show support for the existing CAFTA rules of origin, not see an initiative find success that would weaken those rules and allow China a backdoor entry to our market. So that would be something that we started talking about last year in advocacy days and is an ongoing issue to impress upon lawmakers and the administration the importance of preserving the CAFTA rules and keeping the benefits of a free trade agreement to the signatories of the free trade agreement and not letting third parties like China access our market in this way. And with that, I will turn it over to Augie to talk some more about government procurement and regulatory issues.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And let me echo Sarah's point earlier about what a privilege it is to work with USINFI and to have an opportunity to represent you in the federal policy arena, because of the enormous contribution you make to our economy and the exciting things you're doing in regard to enhancing the use of textiles and their various applications. With that said, I do want to focus initially on government procurement. It's obviously a huge issue for our sector of the industry. The military generally buys about $1.6 to $2 billion worth of textile-related product every year. When there's that much money on the table, you can assume that there is a significant and aggressive policy debate about how the government makes decisions to move those purchases forward. And in our industry, we have a long track record of supporting and requesting that Congress take a strong Buy American approach. It goes back actually to the World War II era, where our industry worked to get a Buy American statute in place. It's called the Berry Amendment, and it governs all of DoD's purchases of textile-related product. It's been expanded to include agriculture and specialty steel. And those three industry segments, without hesitation, I can tell you, have the most comprehensive Buy American provision within any aspect of U.S. government procurement. As mentioned, the Berry Amendment is very comprehensive. It's a 100% U.S. content, U.S. labor requirement, and it applies to all divisions and agencies within the Department of Defense. You would think it would be non-controversial, but it's anything but. You can imagine that foreign governments, offshore producers, and even at times program managers within the Pentagon have all taken an adversarial view of the Berry Amendment and sought to weaken it or have it rejected outright. So I've been doing government relations for the textile industry the better part of 40 years, and I would say that the first 35 was quite controversial, difficult in regard to trying to preserve the Berry Amendment. The last 4 or 5, there's been a sea change, and that sea change has and somewhat attributed to President Trump. Love him or hate him, he did recalibrate the thinking around Buy American, the thinking around trade policy, the thinking around being dependent on offshore suppliers such as China for important materials. And so we've been riding a bit of a wave in regard to issues like the Berry Amendment here the last 4 or 5 years, where we've gone on the offensive as opposed to just trying to defend our territory. One specific improvement that we have been able to achieve was a lowering of the contract threshold level, which triggers the Berry Amendment. It's now $150,000. So anything above $150,000, you have to buy American by the Defense Department. And we lowered that from 250 to 150. And I don't want to necessarily get bogged down in the details, but it is those types of issues that can make or break the effectiveness of a statute like this. If they can't get rid of the Berry Amendment, for example, they'll try to kill you by 1,000 cuts and weakening the enforcement provisions and so forth and so on. But as I mentioned, a little bit of momentum these days that has allowed us to preserve the Berry Amendment in its form, in a strong form, and actually improve some of its tenets. We've also sought to expand the concept of the Berry Amendment outside the Department of Defense. Going back to 2008, 2009, the first major expansion that took place was something called the Kissel Amendment, which applied a Berry type rule to the Department of Homeland Security. And unfortunately, the Department of Homeland Security was not enamored with that concept. It was the better part of a year and a half fight on Capitol Hill to get that done. And then once it was implemented, a rather difficult process of getting DHS to fully enforce it. They narrowed the Kissel Amendment as much as possible, but essentially it requires the Transportation Security Administration to use berry type rules to procure all of its textile related products. The second major expansion of berry came at the end of 2001. And that was tied to the federal purchases of personal protective equipment. The Buy PPE in America Act was passed in December of 2021. And it was supported or sponsored by Senator Portman of Ohio, Senator Peters of Michigan. And this was the second major enhancement of our activities on Buy American in the last 4 or 5 years. I mentioned that President Trump recalibrated things in terms of the thinking along the lines of Buy American mandates, and then COVID hit. And COVID crystallized for policymakers, both in the executive branch and on Capitol Hill, the foolishness of being dependent on offshore suppliers for critical materials. At the height of COVID, China, which was supplying the overwhelming majority of our PPE, decided to start siphoning off those exports for various reasons, not the least of which is they were having a shortage in their homeland, and therefore created this enormous shortfall at the height of the pandemic. That helped policymakers understand that Buy American provisions are not just a debate about the cost of a product and if it's higher or lower, that's the only determining factor. They began to see that you have to have a sound and strong industrial base to meet the needs of the homeland, meet the needs of the military in case of an emergency. So that bill was passed at the end of 2021 and now requires the US government to begin applying berry type rules to their PPE purchases. One more enhancement, and I should have updated this slide, I apologize for not doing that, was the passage of the Hopper Act at the very end of last year. The Hopper Act stands for the Homeland Procurement Reform Act, and it uses a rather clever, I wish I would have come up with this concept, but I didn't. Some others in the coalition did, and I need to give them credit for it. Comes up with a rather clever mechanism to require that the Department of Homeland Security use 1/3 of all of their expenditures on textiles, apparel, PPE, footwear for US small businesses. So it's a sort of backdoor US mandate by connecting to the small business set aside concept. That bill will go into effect approximately the June timeframe, 180 days after the passage of the legislation. It was tied to the National Defense Authorization Act, which I believe was signed on December the 21st, so 180 days from that point. Again, it will help give domestic producers a bigger slice of the pie in terms of overall spending at the Department of Homeland Security. It's kind of hard to, since there's so many agencies, to know precisely the amount that they spend on an annual basis. But for example, if you assume that they're spending about $200 million on textile, uniforms, PPE in any given year, 1/3 of that now has to be used for U.S. small businesses. The last procurement aspect overlaps a little bit with some of the things that Sarah was talking about. Whenever the United States engages in a negotiation with a foreign country to establish a free trade agreement, generally one of the first things they ask for is access to U.S. federal government procurement and preferential access that would allow them to compete for contracts as if they were U.S. manufacturers. This came up under the original NAFTA. It came up under the USMCA renewal of NAFTA. It's come up under discussions and virtually every free trade agreement, even some that did not go into place, such as TPP. We've been negotiating with Europe in regard to a free trade agreement, and this was one of their priorities. And of course, that agreement has not moved forward, but when you analyze this issue, we get confronted with, well, it's fair, right? Why not give them access to our procurement and we get access to theirs? Until you remind folks that, well, we spend $700 billion a year on defense, and Mexico spends and Canada spend a fraction of that. So it's not fair, and it's not equitable. And we're pleased to deny ourselves access to their procurement opportunities in order to preserve our mandates here in the U.S. But it's a little bit of a nuanced issue that is hidden because it's not debated so much in Congress as it is taking place behind closed doors in negotiating sessions. Janelle, if you want to switch to the next slide. The next issue is one that is rapidly expanding and becoming extremely troublesome for us in the textile industry, and it does overlap with procurement issues. Many of you are familiar with PFAS. This is a family of organic chemicals that some have termed as forever chemicals. Because they are long lasting, they are very strong and powerful. In essence, this family of chemicals all have one thing in common. They have at least one fluorine carbon bond molecule. And today, scientists estimate there are about 9,000 different types of PFAS that are in existence. Some of those PFAS have been linked to serious hazardous concerns, cancer, immune deficiencies, so forth and so on. And they have been found in water tables, generally around chemical plants that produce PFAS, and another sort of unique area are airports, and especially military airports, where they do training on fire suppression activities, and they use fire suppression foams because PFAS are critical in the production of those foams, and they seep into the soil and then eventually into the water table. As a result of these linkages, there is a growing and aggressive effort to ban the use of PFAS in the United States and the use of PFAS treatments within various industries. And it's not just the textile industry. PFAS are used in practically every industrial process out there: aerospace, automotive, telecommunications, medical products. And they're valuable because they do create these strong bonds that make products durable and give them longer life. For us, PFAS provide fabrics with greater strength, thermal stability, contaminant barriers, oil and water repellency, and they make things very easy to clean. So you'll find them in upholstery type products, carpeting, and you'll find them in any high performance textile generally, which makes them very valuable to the military and to first responders, and they also are valuable in the PPE arena. The fact that there is a call to ban these chemicals has branched out into a request to keep the US government from purchasing products that have been treated with PFAS. The last 3 to 4 years, there's been a rather aggressive debate within the defense bill to prohibit the military from buying anything generally that has a PFAS treatment within the manufacturing process. So far, we have been successful in convincing the relevant committees and Congress in general that that approach is inappropriate. As mentioned, there are 9,000 PFAS, of which about 24 have been deemed to be problematic. We have conveyed to Congress that if you want to ban those 24, have at it. We don't have a problem with that. Anything where there is a linkage to an environmental hazard, take it off the table. The other nearly 9,000 substances where there has been no demonstrated linkage, we feel should still be usable within our production process because generally there is no credible substitute for these chemicals. So if the military wants a chem bio fabric that is going to prevent a particular contaminant from penetrating and exposing the warfighter to that hazard, you're not going to get it without some sort of sophisticated chemistry that allows you to create that barrier. And right now, PFAS are virtually the only way to do that. So there's a tug of war going on as to how quickly and stringently the government should ban these chemicals. Some of you may be using them. Some of you may have exited this field because of the controversy associated with it. This is only going to accelerate because there is an emotional aspect to this issue. We are asking for a science-based approach to make decisions, but the environmental groups and certain politicians that are close to those groups are dismissing the science and simply saying we need to take the most comprehensive, broad brush approach to this as possible and stop using these chemicals. And Janelle, I'll jump to the next slide to see if there's anything else that I would add. But basically, the PFAS issue, just in wrapping that up, is not only a regulatory concern that is addressed by the Environmental Protection Agency, it has now become a significant procurement concern that is starting to develop within the defense contracting process, but it will quickly spread to the Department of Homeland Security and other agencies as the decisions are made. Are these chemicals acceptable or not? And I'll stop there. And Janelle, I think turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Augie, for that update. And do we have any questions in?
I'm not seeing any questions right now. We can give it a couple minutes here.
We'll give them a couple minutes, but in the meantime, we have our chairs of the board, Bob Hancock, Mark Harries, and Joey Smith on. Any comments from the three of you?
No, I'd just like to thank Augie and Sarah for being here today and explaining some of these issues. I think just before I got on, I did see something about my home state, Pennsylvania, passing something with PFAS and I think drinking water, though. I think it had something to do with drinking water. I think my state passed something, so it's definitely on our minds here for water quality, especially since we also use dyeing and finishing of our products. So
Mark, that's an excellent point. This is a two-tiered policy debate or discussion. One is at the federal level, where the EPA and Congress are considering tighter regulations and, as we just mentioned, procurement bans. The wild, wild west, though, is at the state level, with dozens of states now adopting, considering PFAS-related prohibitions. As you can imagine, California, Washington State, New Hampshire, Maine, sort of the Minnesota, Janelle, kind of the tip of the spear on this issue, and some have already adopted outright prohibitions. Maine did so last year. The prohibition won't take place for another year and a half, 2 years, but you can see now a second round of states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Rhode Island, all wanting to address this issue and not wanting to be left behind, so to speak, in regard to some of the environmental groups and their advocacy to address this problem. The drinking water issue is sort of the beginning, but many states are tying drinking water issues to you can't use PFAS applications in your manufacturing process. So it's getting really complicated very quickly.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, Mark's point. We really want to thank the group for getting on and being an advocate for our industry. I think it's super important to continue to be in front of the representatives in Washington, D.C. We've got a lot of new faces that are there now after this last election. So being able to get in front of them and continuing to put a mark on just all of the efforts that we try to do from an industry standpoint and making sure that they're fully aware and continue to hammer home, how important these issues are for the survival of our businesses, whether you're big or small in the U.S. I think it's super critical. So, I continue to push and try to get as many people to come to Washington, D.C. with us. We need as much representation from as many states as we possibly can so that we can continue to push these agendas on our legislative branches and try to make things better for us as an industry and as a country in general. So thank you so much for Augie and Sarah and all that you do as well.
Thank you.
Agreed, Joy, and thank you, Augie and Sarah, again from all of us. I'm glad that we're able to go to Washington again this year. That I think the first time I participated in advocacy days was the last time we went, and it's been virtual since. And you know, I take it almost as a duty that I need to go and participate in this to try and help our businesses and our profession. I mean, it's been a good one for me, and I appreciate everything that it's done for me. And I'd hate to see smaller businesses go away just because of legislation that we may be able to help prevent.
I appreciate that point. You know, the work that we do, and Sarah and I are, part of it is relationship building and networking in Washington, knowing folks in the right offices and committees and executive branch agencies to talk to. But there is no substitute for these offices and agencies in terms of hearing from their actual constituents. Sarah made this point earlier, and the people who are directly impacted by these policies. You can personalize this issue for them in a way that we try to, but aren't necessarily capable of doing. And while it may seem like, you know, 2 days come to Washington, gosh, that's a lot, so forth and so on. I guarantee you that long after you come to Washington, Sarah and I get phone calls or emails or questions saying, you know, the group you brought in here, they mentioned the following, and we're now working on that. I just want to make sure, really get what Bob or Joey or someone said, so that we don't, you know, mess this up now that the decision point has arrived. So it makes our job much easier when you're directly engaged.
And do we have any other questions in?
We do not. You must have answered everything.
Well, if anyone on the webinar thinks of a question later on, we are available to answer those. So my contact information is on this slide, and anything on this past webinar or the advocacy program, an event, I'll make sure to answer your question or get you to the right person, whether it's Sarah or Augie or a board member, and we'll get that answered for you. All right, so I think that's just about everything. We will wrap up, and thank you all for attending, and thank you to the board chairs and Sarah and Augie for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.